Um, I've got such good questions. I've actually written them out. So get ready. We're
ready.
going for a ride.
All right.
First of all, many of your efforts, Congressman, in your 2.5 years, it's been focused on government reform. Lord knows we need it. However, the government reform is such a hot topic, and I want to talk to you about what's been going on, what you personally are doing.
Well, government reform has become kind of a catchphrase in going across the entire government. In this Congress, there's a select committee on government reform, but their focus is on reforming Congress. And it is to make Congress somewhat run more efficiently. A lot of Congress is dictated by the Constitution, so there isn't a whole lot of change you can make. But you can bring things up with current technology. The way that we write legislation can be done much better. The committee is looking at states like the state of Georgia and the way that we do legislation there or here. It's more meaningful to individuals. My focus has been reforming the government as a whole in two specific areas. One, the government is way too large. It is much larger than the founders ever anticipated it being, with too much control, too much power, and too many people, quite frankly. We've seen this in, if you look in the industry, the government ranks the very lowest in customer satisfaction and customer service. And a lot of that is because of the culture within the agencies. When I talk about government reform, I'm talking about reforming the agencies. There's a cultural problem we have in there. And you see that come to fruition even with this president, who is all about draining the swamp. He's about government reform. But he's finding coups within his own agencies because of the culture within those agencies doesn't change from administration to administration because they're career bureaucrats. That's really what we're dealing with. So one of the problems is, why do we have this cultural problem within the government that never changes? And it's with the hiring and firing process, more specifically the firing process. So our government reform is really in two general areas: reforming the way government hires and dismisses employees, and the second is with reforming the agencies to where they once again recognize that they work for the people, that they don't work for the agency, and reforming the way that they handle themselves dealing with the public.
So what is the solution for hiring and firing?
Well, what we've put together is called the Merit Act, and it brings in a standard of employee hiring and dismissal that most industries use, that's in the private sector. I started on this when I served on the Homeland Security Committee in the first Congress, 114th Congress, right after I was elected. And we had the secretary, this was during the Obama administration, we had the Secretary of Homeland Security, Jay Johnson, testifying before the committee. And we were going over their budget, and there was a line item in the budget of $380 million that really didn't make sense to me. So I asked, what is this line item about? And they said, well, that is money that we pay employees to not come to work. $380 million. That was mind-boggling. What do you mean you pay employees to stay at home and not come to work? Well, they were kind of caught in this situation. Every job in Homeland Security requires a security clearance. The janitors, the maintenance people, even though they're not dealing with nation secrets, because they are in a secure facility working, they have to have a secret level security clearance. So every employee has to have a security clearance. Well, they had numbers of employees, because of disciplinary actions, had lost their security clearance or it had been suspended, and they can't come to work. It takes an average of 360 days to get rid of a bad employee in the federal government under the current system. So they have to pay the employees full pay and benefits that can't come to work because they don't have a security clearance. On top of that, that's just the initial firing process is about 360 days. There is an appeal process with the Merit System Protection Board. That appeal process, you can stretch it out for another year. So there were instances where federal employees were being paid with your tax dollars basically for a 2-year vacation of doing nothing at your expense. So the more we dug into this, we started realizing this is a huge problem in the federal government. We started talking to people who were working in those agencies, and they said, yes, it's major reform because the default way a supervisor will get rid of a bad employee because it is so hard to fire them. Now, you take, for instance, a supervisor. He's got a slot that this employee who's a poor performer, doesn't show up to work. There's instances of people running private businesses. There was, in the Department of Transportation, there was an employee who was running a private trucking company while on the clock using government resources. There was another instance in the EPA where a young man working for the EPA was stealing computers from the EPA and selling them on eBay. Got as brazen to steal the security cameras, I guess not thinking that there was a DVR system, so they had a picture of him unbolting the security cameras. He's still working at the EPA. And here's the problem, because it's so difficult, takes a year, that's a slot they can't fill. Because that person, even though they've got to pay them, it takes at least a year to get rid of them, they're short of employees. So the default way of getting rid of a bad employee in the federal government is to promote them. And that's coming from the folks who are working there, is the best way to get rid of a bad employee is to promote them into another job. So that's the problem. Now the hiring process, it's a lot easier to get a job with the federal government than get fired from a job, and they know that, but it's tied with the hiring process because we have to address that when it comes to the dismissal process. And it goes back to a court case called Loudermill, not Loudermilk, Loudermill versus the Cleveland Board of Education, went to the Supreme Court. And this was a guy who applied to, I think it was to be a security guard with the school system or a resource officer. He was fraudulent with his application and claimed he had training in security and all this, and he didn't. He had been a janitor in the past. Well, when the Board of Education realized he had lied on his resume, they fired him. He took it to the courts, and it went all the way to Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court ruled that certain civil service jobs carry a private property right, and therefore you cannot be fired without due process. Now, I want you to put this in perspective. If somebody goes to the Department of Engineer and falsely claims to be a nuclear engineer, and they're not, the Department of Energy can't fire them even though they lied. They have to go through this entire process, which is now taking about 360 days to get rid of the employee because of that decision. So we have to address it through two perspectives, through the hiring process to make sure it's done properly, but more importantly, facilitating a more efficient way of giving them due process and moving them along to some other employment.
So out here in the audience, how many of you have ever heard of the Merit Act? Are you familiar with it? Not many. So, Congressman, what's the status? Will it pass in the Congress? Will President Trump, will he sign it?
To answer the second question, yes, absolutely. In the State of the Union address last year, the President endorsed the Merit Act in his speech. He said, by the end of this year, I want Congress to put on my desk a bill that allows the supervisors within the federal government to fire on a timely basis bad employees. And so he has endorsed it. We've been working closely with the White House. We got very close to passing it out of the House last year. It took us a while to get it through committee. We were able to move it out of the committee as soon as the president made that endorsement. We jumped on it, and we were able to move it through the Committee on Government Reform. We were poised to bring it to the floor. Speaker Ryan was supporting it. Kevin McCarthy was supporting it. The problem we had was the November election. The labor unions, even though it didn't affect most labor unions, they stick together because of the, public employee labor unions were opposed to it. All the other labor unions jumped on board and opposed it as well. We have several Republicans in very pro-labor districts that were up for election. So we decided to wait till after the November election and bring it to the floor for a vote. When we got in the lame duck session, so many of our members who were supportive lost in that election. They weren't even coming back for the lame duck session. They weren't. So we were afraid to bring it to the floor and not have enough votes to try it again in the next year. Now, obviously, with the Democrats in control, they're not in favor of this legislation. There's some, we do have some Democrats that are supporting, but for the most part, Nancy Pelosi will never bring it up. So we've partnered with David Perdue, helped him with language, and Senator Perdue has introduced the language in the Senate. And he already has, I think, 5 co-sponsors. So we're working in that direction. If it does pass out of the Senate, it's probably not going to get passed in the House, but what we can do is get the Senate, if they can bring it up for a vote, at least bring it to the floor, then we've got a lot of ammunition to go in the next Congress, if we take the majority, which I think we will, and be able to move this thing forward. Because, you know, quite frankly, it is a huge drain on American taxpayers. There's an appeal process, and to give you an illustration of where we are right now. So if you're a fellow employee, you do something very bad, you get fired, you go through the 360-day process, and finally you go through it, you're done. You can appeal to the Merit System Protection Board. Now, our bill keeps the Merit System Protection Board in place, but it cuts down the firing process to less than a month for both the firing and the appeal instead of 2 years. It's less than 1 month. It varies per agency, but it's around 15 days. You got 15 days to clear out your desk. In that period, you have to file your appeal. It goes to the Merit System Protection Board. They have 10 to 15 days to approve or disapprove the appeal. The problem we have right now is there are 3 commissioners that are appointed to the Merit System Protection Board. There are none serving on the board right now, 0. So we have to get the Senate moving to confirm these people in the Merit System Protection Board. And my good friend Jody Heiss has actually introduced a companion bill that we've worked with him on that would reform the Merit System Protection Board in itself to make sure we keep people on there. So this is the huge problems we have in the culture of government, and it's a big uplifting, but it's one I think we can actually accomplish.
So how far along is it in the Senate?
Well, he's introduced the bill. He has 5 co-sponsors. They have yet to have a hearing in committee. Okay. And so we're hoping that sometime at the beginning of next year, that things move a lot slower in the Senate than they do in the House, but Senator Perdue is working it very hard, and we're optimistic that he will get a hearing and hopefully a vote on the Senate floor before the year is out, or before next year.
I hate to do this to you, but let's move back to customer service issue again. And first of all, I want to say to you people, I do have contact with the Congressman's constituent services, and they're good.
They are
If
awesome.
they were bad, I wouldn't tell you in front of this group, but I commend you. That reflects well on you. But we all know that the federal government, if you look at a survey or a poll, they're the absolute worst. Customer service doesn't exist. So what are you doing about this?
Well, again, that kind of ties into the culture, but I do have dedicated employees that all they do is go to bat with the federal government for constituents, whether it's the IRS or the 94 lettered agencies out there they deal with regularly, the Veterans Administration, Social Security, whatever. And as I was looking into it, it's amazing that people will have been dealing, let's say, with the disability issue for 2 years and getting nowhere. They call our office, and in 2 weeks we get it resolved for them. That's entirely wrong. It's entirely wrong that a citizen has to call the congressman, and the congressman then gets engaged and they jump. And some agencies don't even jump when we call. But the agencies should be jumping for you because they work for you, they don't work for me. They should be treating you with respect. They should be treating you as their boss, of which you are. But that culture doesn't exist in these agencies, and part of it is because most of these, let me say, a lot of these employees have been taught that you're there to empower the agency, not serve the people. And it reflects in the way that they do their job. So we started looking at how can we actually improve customer service. So we actually have engaged with others who have brought in business-type models to do this. And the first thing we found out is there's no evaluation and there's no standard of customer service in the federal government at all. Now, the VA has, since the president has brought in some reforms into the VA, they've started actually, they put together a customer experience team, and they're putting in these standards and they're working in that direction. And so we've been working very closely with the VA to take what they're doing, modify it a little bit, and apply it across the board to the whole federal government. So The legislation we're still working to perfect it. We expect to introduce it very soon, but it would work with the White House, with the Congressional Budget Office, with OPM, and it would create a set of standards for the federal government to abide by when it comes to things like the call length. Are you actually resolving a situation? How many of the situations are not resolved that going through a member of Congress is actually getting it done? And requiring them to do a survey. They're not even surveying their customers because, quite frankly, I don't think they want to know how badly they're doing. So these are two of the areas of government reform that we've been putting a lot of effort in the last couple of years.
Well, and one thing, the Congress, the Democrats in particular, they just talk. And they don't do anything. I mean, no bills of significance that they've passed. But help us understand why the government can't solve these problems.
Well, you're right, and that's one thing I've been telling. And even in the conservative movement, sometimes we have to be reminded, because a lot of times we look for Washington, D.C. to fix all the problems that are going on in the nation. Let me tell you, there's very little that we can do in Washington to fix the major issues other than economic. When you look at economic, yeah, we can lower taxes and we can cut regulations, which we've done, and that's why you're seeing the economy as strong as it is right now. We can deal with trade and, of course, immigration, securing our border. Those are the types of things that we can have an effect. But so often, let me just use an illustration. Gun violence, something I think you know a little something about guns.
I know a little about that.
I've actually been a victim of a mass shooting. Many of you may remember when a gunman walked onto the congressional baseball field during our practice and started shooting. During that, I had over 20 rounds shot at me, hitting all around me during that time period. I ended up getting off the field because one of the staff members who was following me out of the field, just my training in the military kicked in. As I was running from home, played up the first base, shooter was over on the third base side, was shooting across the field. I could see the bullets hitting me, hitting all around me. My colleagues, many were jumping in the dugout, and my first thought was, that's a kill box. If he gets on the field, that's going to be, there's no escape route. So I ran off the field to find some concealment, identify where the shooter was, and then plan an escape route. One of the staff members was following me out the gate, and he took a bullet in the back, came out his chest, and he went and fell down next to the Capitol Police SUV. So I ran over to help him. The shooter had then worked his way down behind the backstop. I was wearing bright yellow Kennesaw State University jersey. It's a bad thing to wear to a gunfight. You don't want to wear bright yellow. But he had tracked where I had gone and spent most of the time trying to shoot it where myself and one other guy was behind that SUV. Well, I was pinned down there. A lot of stuff I was taught in the military came back to my mind. You know, spent most of the time just trying to get 10 feet to Matt, who was laying there literally bleeding to death, sucking chest wound. He survived. It was a miracle. The shooting lasted almost 8 minutes. The shooter shot almost 100 rounds, if not a little more than 100 rounds. But one thing I never thought as I was there, I was thinking of a lot of different things, how to help Matt, how to, what do I need to do when I can get to him? Can I get to him? I never once thought, wait till I get back to Capitol Hill because I'm going to pass a law. I never thought that. And the reason is, this guy was already violating dozens of state and federal laws. He had zero respect for a law. There isn't another law we could have passed that would have made one bit of difference in him because it was an act of evil that he was he was there to commit murder. He had a hit list of Republicans in his coat pocket. He was only targeting those wearing baseball uniforms, and the two Capitol Police officers were shooting back at him occasionally. That's only who he's targeting. It didn't matter what law we passed. He had no respect for the law. So another law would have made a difference. I got shot at back home a few weeks after that. Same thing. The apparent assassin laying on the side of the road as my wife and I drove by that shot at us was already violating dozens of laws. We were in a car wreck between those two incidents, multiple flip over. Well, I'm sitting on the side of the interstate waiting on an ambulance after they pulled us out of the car. I never thought, boy, you wait till I get to Washington, I'm going to pass a bill. You know, speeding and distracted driving is already illegal. There's not a law could pass to make the difference. A few weeks after the second shooting, I was on a train go into a conference with Republicans when a garbage truck pulled across the tracks and we hit the garbage truck, derailed part of the train, killed one of the people in the garbage truck, a lot of injuries on the train. People won't travel with me anymore, Carolyn. I don't understand that. But I never thought during that we should pass a law because it's already illegal to go around the crossing guards. My point is, most of the major issues we're facing is a cultural crisis in this nation. There's nothing that government can do to fix it. We actually have to change the hearts and the minds of the people.
Absolutely. And by the way, there are some 15,000 gun laws. I know you're smart, but I don't think you're smart enough to come up with a new one or
one that's gonna make a
anybody else.
difference.
They're all written already.
Yeah.
So, Congressman, what is it that makes good people like you try to save our country?
Well, and this is the thing that I had to realize. There's not a whole lot I can do. I have a sphere of influence of people that I talk to on a regular basis, people I work with, friends, family, associates. I have a sphere of influence with them. Everybody in here has a sphere of influence. But there's a group of folks that every week they influence other people around them. That's our pastors. That's those that run nonprofits. And those are the ones that can actually, because the change in America is going to happen on this side of the podium, not this side. It's the people you work with. I remember when I was in state legislature, I was working on a heartbeat bill with Ed Setzer. I was in the state Senate. He was in the House, and we were trying to pass another heartbeat bill. And one day
He's a great guy.
He is a great guy. But I remember telling him, I was praying one evening, I said, Lord, it would be great if we pass this heartbeat bill and we can end abortion in Georgia. And it all of a sudden dawned on me, so what it would be like if we passed this law. Well, the next day there would be a lot of illegal abortions because we haven't done anything to change in the hearts and the minds of the people having the abortions. Well, that really plays to most of the issues that we're dealing with. So we decided to try something. So I partnered with David Barton of Wall Builders, a good friend of mine, if some of you may know him. He does a lot of tours in Washington. He's a great guy. If you haven't had an opportunity to get to know David, wallbuilders.com, and you want to know anything for history, Constitution, this is a guy to go to. So we partnered with him, and I decided, let me go invite 40 pastors from Bartow County to come spend 3 days in Washington, D.C. So we brought them up there. They spent 3 days, did tours of the Capitol. They learned the Christian heritage of our nation. They learned that it was really, the nation was built on the back of the churches by this same philosophy of changing the hearts and the minds of the individuals. It was so successful, that has carried on with the pastors that came. It's multi-denominational. We have black churches, white churches, all kind of churches there. We have pastors tell me, look, I've been in ministry for 30 years. I've done every conference you can imagine. The 3 days I spent at Washington, D.C. with your program was life-changing, more than anything else. So in Bartow County, they came back. They continue meeting together weekly. But they decided instead of just meeting, let's do something. So they went to the school system and got engaged with the schools, helping with a third grade reading program from the faith-based community, and they're turning education around. Why third grade? Because there's a correlation between those who don't learn reading well in third grade and our prison population later. And they're actually having an impact. They're even going further in dealing with other issues within the community. So we expanded it the next time. We brought pastors from Cobb County and Cherokee County. The same scenario. We're now organizing our third event. It will be in the spring. This is what's being transformational, is when the sphere of influence you are starts changing the hearts and minds of the people, getting to why are they put in these positions and teaching them, look, socialism has become more popular. One thing we've learned, though, is a lot of people now support socialism over capitalism, but they don't understand what socialism is. When you drill down to, well, do you like socialism or freedom? Well, they like freedom. Well, what's socialism? Well, that means the government telling you most of what you can do, owning most of your property, telling you what job you can have. When you actually drill down and start asking the question, people don't like socialism. But the only way that you're going to get there is mainstream media is not going to teach these differences, but the people who have the ear of the folks in America, when they actually explain the differences and they have their ear and they trust them. Look, people don't trust me because of my title. I lost a lot of friends and family the day I took my oath of office. But the pastors people trust. And so this is area that we've invested some time and energy to actually get more engaged with our faith-based community and the population to say, look, if we want to transform America, just transform the people, educate them.
I couldn't agree more. There's one thing for sure. Congress cannot legislate the morality you speak of. So I would admonish you to do what the congressman's doing. If your church is where you're really involved, in schools, any organization, NRA, the Conservative Union, American Conservative Union, be involved like you are. And that way, perhaps we can help change the hearts and minds of people, because we've got a country to save, and it's going to take a real family to do it.
And that's why John Adams said, our Constitution is for religious and moral people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. If you're going to have limited government, which government was established to protect your rights, that's its primary responsibility. A small government can only do that if the people generally respect the rights of each other. That's why he said a moral and religious community is those who have morals respect the morals of others. They respect their rights. When you have an immoral society, it's the greed, the theft, the murder, these are the things that take away rights from others. Even the government's going to be larger at that point. And so that's why it's so important is that we teach these things to the communities, to the individuals, and not just try to legislate it. When we founded our country, there were 4 felonies on the book. Today, there's over 4,000, and crime is worse than it was then. Law can't fix the problems of the heart, but the community can.
That's great. So now you understand why I'm a cheerleader for Congressman Loudermilk. He's good. He's up for re-election. I would admonish you to join his team. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you all.